Good morning, friends. For those of you who don't know me, Andrew is my name, and we're going to spend some time in God's Word together. Today's reading is from Mark 16, the text for which will appear on the screens at the front and above me. We're at the point where Jesus has been crucified, with his body laid in a tomb just prior to the start of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is now past, and a small group of women are going to the tomb to attend to Jesus' body with spices. Please join with me now as we read from verses 1 through to 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on, the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance to the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Brothers and sisters, friends and guests, boys and girls, good morning and grace be with you. Welcome to Easter Sunday. My name's Pete Stedman. I'm a member of the ministry team here at Norwest, and just a joy to see the room so full. If you know anything about the church calendar, you'll know it's Easter Sunday, but it has another name, which is Resurrection Sunday. For today is the day that we celebrate that the tomb was empty, that death and sin were defeated by the risen Lord Jesus Christ. Can I say, so good to have you here today. We're delighted that you've chosen to celebrate this day with us. You know, in many ways, almost every way actually, my family is almost certainly like yours. So my kids go to school, we play lots of sport, we fight, we forgive, we have busy afternoons with activities all over the place. My wife and I feel like an Uber service, despite the fact that during COVID we said we wouldn't go back there, but we went back there. And we have had over the years lots and lots of pets, from tadpoles to frogs, guinea pigs to budgies, rabbits to dogs, silkworms to lizards. My family is just like yours. However, if there's one area where my family might be slightly different to yours, it comes when one of our pets die. My children ask me to conduct a funeral service. I think they assume that as an ordained minister I'm suitably qualified, and so I put on my robes and I grab my prayer book. No, I don't put on robes, but we have had a number of funeral services over the years for our beloved pets. Always sad, surprisingly significant, actually. Now, 2 years ago, we had one for our dog. Spencer was his name. You see, that was my wife's maiden name, so we honoured her family by naming the dog after them. They were delighted. We're live streaming. Hello, B&M. Good to see you. Now, we had Spence for 14 years, longer than any of the kids were alive, actually, so he was really embedded, part of the family. And as dogs do, as all pets do, he grew old, he slowed down. And the day came when we needed to say goodbye to Spence, and we did, and we had a funeral, and it was really sad. And that was it. Life went on, and we still laugh and remember Spence. At times we still speak about him, actually. But I want you to imagine something with me today. I want you to imagine that a couple of days after the funeral that we held in our backyard, the kids woke up one morning and looked outside, and there was Spencer, looking bright and playful with a ball in his mouth. Can you imagine trying to get your head around that? Firstly, for yourself, and then secondly, trying to explain that to the kids? Because I dug the hole. I lowered him in. I filled it up. Impossible, right? It doesn't happen. Now, we might wish it does, and actually for more than pets if we're honest. But in the real world, it doesn't. And I wanted to start with that this morning because I think that we often come to Resurrection Sunday today, no matter who we are in the room, with one of two things going on in our heads. Either we are deeply sceptical that resurrection ever happened. We're incredulous. We've never seen it. Dead people don't get up. It's a classic religious fairy tale. And I just want to say that is the logical approach of the vast majority of people. But on the other hand, there are those in the room, perhaps those who are here more regularly, who have become so used to this story, so familiar with it, that you have lost the shock and awe of this remarkable event. And so today, and just for a while, we're going to be thinking about Jesus' resurrection from the dead and what we learn about it from Mark's gospel. I think it actually speaks to every one of us, regardless of whether you come here today as a skeptic or as the desensitised. Let me tell you what we're going to see up front. We're going to see resurrection unexpected. We're going to see resurrection terrifying. And we're going to see resurrection renovating. So let's start on the Sunday morning where we are in Mark's Gospel. The year is 33 AD and the weekend has transpired. To be clear, this weekend in 33 AD, a normal weekend in every way. People got up in the morning and went to bed in the evening. People went to the markets and did their shopping. Bunnings was Chockers. People then went to the temple to worship their gods, and there were Roman crucifixions happening just outside the city on a hill. All really normal for the first century. But things are about to get far from normal, because in verse 1 of Mark's historical account, he speaks of 3 women who head to Jesus' tomb to anoint Jesus' body. To be clear, that's normal. They ask each other, who's going to roll the stone away from the entrance? That's normal, because in chapter 15 we read that they saw the tomb sealed up. Verse 4, we read that they get to the tomb, they find the stone rolled away, the stone was massive, and this is the first hint that their day may not pan out as they thought. You know, there's a pretty common mistake that a bunch of us make when we read about stories like this in the Bible. Not just this story, but other ones like it. And it's an assumption that we bring to the story. It goes a bit like this. You know what? People back then were so unsophisticated in their thinking. Weren't they? So naive. I mean, they probably just sort of believed that stuff like this happened all the time, you know, that people just come back to life. There's a name for this sort of thinking that we all do. It's called having a recency bias. A recency bias. That is where we put more weight on the way we think and the things we believe now than anything in the past. We assume that our thinking is so much clearer than the past. These days, we're much better at critical thinking, aren't we? Our rational faculties just so highly attuned today. Man, they had no idea back in the first century. I just want to say that that perspective, which is so common, is just not supported by any evidence. So have a closer look. Verse 1 on the screen. We read that 3 women, Mary, and Salome, are heading to the tomb with spices to anoint the body. Now, what are these spices? Well, they are not some sort of welcome back from the dead gift. They're not some sort of we've missed you perfume. No, these were spices used to cover the smell of decay. 2 days in a rock tomb coming into a Middle Eastern summer, you needed spices. This is your Glen 20 of the first century. That's what they've got. Now, more than that, Jesus' body is referred to back in Mark 15:45, and the word used there by Mark is not body. No, that's the much more sanitised and polite way that our translators have gone with the word. It actually uses the word there, cadaver, corpse. Now, we hate those words in English. Why? Because they are so impersonal. That is the way you refer to a person who's now so depersonified. This is no relational way to speak about Jesus. This is the language of the university in its human dissection class. That's the Greek word used in the original. My point, no one expected Jesus to be alive. everyone who knew him to be dead. And the actions of all declare this and reflect this all the way through. So whatever assumptions you bring to this story today, let's be clear on this. Resurrection, unexpected. All right, I want you to go back for a moment to our imaginary story where our dog Spencer has come back to life. So my wife and I are waking up on a Sunday morning, let's be consistent with the story, Sunday morning, just a couple of days after the funeral that I've officiated at. We wake up because the kids downstairs are going ballistic. All right, and we think, well, we should get up and see what's going on. We go downstairs, there's the kids pointing out on the deck, and there's the dog just like new. All right, what do you think my wife Bree and I do at this point? Do you think we look at each other with wide smiles and say, well, beats me, but how wonderful is this? Or do you think you play at your phone and make a reel for Instagram? Hey guys, dead dog back. Weird, huh? Smiling emoji. Or do you think you look at one another and then look at the kids and then say to your kids, hey guys, can you just head back to your rooms for a moment? Mum and Dad need to have a chat. Because Spencer coming back from the dead may be amazing for those who don't understand death. But Spencer coming back for anyone who does understand death is actually terrifying. What do you do? Who would you call? I mean, who helps you in a situation like that? Maybe you'd call a priest, even if you weren't religious, because this is sort of a category of an event that defies categories. Why? Because departed pets depart. And I think when we read this story, particularly those in the room who are Christians, perhaps those of us who have had regular exposure to this story, we've been desensitised to this. We've forgotten the sheer impossibility of what this is talking about. And I wonder if we read it, and sure, they're expecting a body there, but it's not there, and hey, Jesus is alive again, like Spencer on the back deck. Isn't it wonderful? He's come back to life again. No, not wonderful. Not wonderful. It's terrifying. It's category destroyingly so. Which is why in verse 5, the women are not giving each other high fives. Can you see that? No, we read they're distressed. They're upset. They're alarmed. Why? They turn up, the tomb's empty, Jesus' body gone, and a stranger is sitting there. Now, the alarm of the women at this point could be linked to one of two things. Either the fact that the tomb's been desecrated, it's open and the body's gone, or it could be linked to the fact that there is someone sitting there dressed in a white robe. This is a description of a messenger from God. This is the description of an angel. Now, that's a heart starter. I'm not sure if you've seen an angel. As a clergyman, I haven't. But I reckon if you saw one, alarm would be a good description of what you would feel. But then their fear shifts. Actually, then their fear grows. See, if they're unsettled in verse 5 by the messenger, they are utterly terrified by verse 8, by the message. Now, what message could this messenger bring, this angel bring, that could produce such terror? Well, it's the one on the screen now. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. Now, that is the message that makes the women flee. That is the message that overwhelms them, we're told in the original. That is the message that forces them to silence. They don't speak about this to anyone. What is going on for these women? It appears what's happened is that the women's categories for life and death have been shattered. And I wonder if these women are now finding this new reality crash in on their assumptions. Think about it. These women had given up years of their lives to follow Jesus. They had believed what he'd said. They'd swallowed his teaching. They'd drunk the Kool-Aid. It tasted good. He seemed like the real deal. But you know, there is nothing like the cold and brutal reality of a Roman crucifixion on a windswept hill to burst your bubble. And they had seen it. They saw it. And they saw them take down his body. They saw them carry it to the tomb. They saw that. They wept as the rock rolled over the entrance. We learned they saw that too. It was also morbid and final and devastating. And that was only 24 hours earlier. They've had 24 hours to make sense of this huge loss. And they wake up on this Sunday morning probably feeling hungover with grief. And then their alarm grows to terror in that tomb. Why? I wonder if it's because they are just beginning to comprehend that maybe, just maybe, all Jesus said was true. Maybe they're trying to reconcile what their eyes had seen with what was burning in their hearts. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to realise that the one they knew, the one they had laughed with and ate with and wept with and walked with, that one in whom they had lost faith and hope, actually, that one, he might actually be who he said he was, the Messiah, the King of everything. Yes, the King of the empty tomb, but then also, and because of that, the King of the world. Their response, it seems to me rightly, is terror. Who was this man? And you know what? Our story then ends there, which is pretty weird. That's where Mark's gospel closes. Why not tell us what happened? I mean, Matthew's gospel does. Why not close this out for us so I can wrap it up with a nice pretty bow and send you out happy and go home to your chocolate? Well, because that's not what it says, because it's not here. What we're left with is women speechless in fear. And maybe we need to be left with a renewed sense of fear before Jesus, the one whom we love to domesticate, to make small, to make nice. But actually the one we learn here is the King of everything. You know, let me finish up. There is something here that we can go out with that can help us as we leave, and it's better than a pretty bow, okay? It's actually what the white man in robes says in verse 7. Now, we sort of skipped over it before. Why? Because it's the one thing that makes sense. Nothing in this passage fits our categories except for verse 7, but because verse 7 does, we go over the top of it. But what the angel says in verse 7 is so transformative that it actually renovates people's lives. It renovates people's lives. So let me show you verse 6, the weird part, the stuff we've looked at. Don't be alarmed, the angel says. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene who was crucified. He's risen, he's not here. See the place where they laid him. Okay, that sort of breaks our categories. This part doesn't. Notice this. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, Jesus is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you'll see him just as he told you. And I'm saying that this is the piece that's most significant as we leave here. You might be thinking, why? What is significant about that? Well, just for a moment, I want you to think about the two groups of people who are named here. We'll start with the disciples. The disciples, who at this point in the story are nowhere to be seen. No, it is the women who have the courage to go to the tomb. It is the women who show reverence for Jesus with the spices. The disciples are terrified and scattered. They're nowhere to be seen. The disciples, who throughout Jesus' ministry with them on earth were so slow to understand what he said. In fact, they never really got why he came. They were disbelieving, they were misunderstanding, they were thick. The disciples, who squabbled over positions within Jesus' inner circle and wanted to make it all about themselves. The disciples, who at the very hour Jesus needed them to keep watch, fell asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then when the Roman soldiers turned up, scattered. And we read in the text, everyone deserted Jesus. The man in white says, go get them. Jesus wants them. Go tell them. But not just them, Peter too. Peter, you've got to love Peter. Peter, who rebuked Jesus and stopped him trying to fulfill God's mission for the world. Nice one, Peter. Peter, who swore he'd never deny Jesus and yet did not once, not twice, but 3 times. Peter, who appeared so clever, so bright, such a leader, and yet crumpled in his denial of Jesus before a slave girl. And the man in white says, Peter, go and get him too. That fearful bunch that ran for their lives, go get them. That slow bunch that never could get their heads around what I was saying, them, I want them. And Peter, that weak one, who had every chance to stand with me but denied me, and again, make sure you bring him too. Brothers and sisters, friends and guests, do you see what Jesus' resurrection is? It is evidence of a second chance for the fearful, the slow and the weak. Jesus' resurrection offers a new start. Jesus' death deals with our sin, but Jesus' resurrection proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that a new start is possible. And here's the thing, when you see that, when you peer into that, you realise that's actually an invitation. And I wonder if that's why these women are so terrified in verse 8. It's not because they don't understand the resurrection. They don't misunderstand it. They actually are starting to understand it rightly. Before their eyes, their futures are starting to open up in ways they had never even thought. Because they're realising if Jesus is alive, that actually changes everything. And here we sit 2,000 years later, and you've made a decision to come to a church in Sydney. Is there any impact, any implication of this for you? Well, let me be clear about one thing. If this story is not true, it means nothing. If it's a religious fairy tale, then put it in the same category as Cinderella. Entertaining as a child, maybe, but irrelevant for an adult apart from nostalgia. If it's a religious fairy tale, it means nothing. But if it is true, then it actually proves that everything Jesus said is true. Now, that's not merely interesting nor delightful. That is category destroying. And life cannot look the same. Because it means that Jesus is God. It means that sin is real. It means that Jesus has dealt with our sin once and for all. And it also means that by his resurrection, Jesus has finally put that great enemy, death, to death and done away with that vacuous philosophy of eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow you die. You see, if Jesus' resurrection is true, then it means that everything Jesus said is true. Now let me speak personally to you. Maybe you sit here today, a regular or a guest, and you've heard things Jesus has said in the past, but you've been afraid of them, for the impact upon your life has seemed too great. Or maybe Jesus has said some things and it's just been so hard to get your head around. Can I say there's a bunch of those? And you've put him and them in the too hard basket. Or maybe, just maybe, you once knew Jesus. But like Peter, for reasons both personal and regrettable, you turned your back on him. And you know, those three categories actually capture every one of us in the room. And so I want to say this morning to the fearful, the slow, and the weak in the room, Jesus says to you, I haven't given up. My death deals with your past, and my resurrection shows you that your future is wide open with me. And brothers and sisters, friends and guests, when you come to understand that, when you come to believe that, your life is renovated. No longer defined by our past, no longer entrapped by our pain, no longer confused by the future. Jesus has dealt with it all very clearly. You know, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who call this church home here in Baulkham Hills. Do you know why they come here? Do you know why they belong? It is not because they believe in religious fairy tales. You should ask them. They're sitting right next to you. It is because they have had their life renovated by the Lord Jesus Christ. And Jesus' resurrection from the dead really is great news for both the skeptical and the desensitized. Actually, it's the world's best news for all who fall short of what Jesus would have of us. And for those who come to put their stumbling trust in him, hear the words of the man in white one more time. Jesus has risen, and he is waiting for you. What an invitation. Have a great Easter.